So the GTX 1660 has been out for a little over a week now, so chances are that you've seen this benchmarked a couple of times already, but in my opinion, this is the GPU that you Ryzen 3 2200G or 2400G owners have been waiting for. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be checking out and benchmarking the brand new GTX 1660, but with a little bit different of a perspective than some other YouTubers. And if you're new here and you want to see more benchmarking or PC building videos, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But before we get into it, let me quickly introduce the sponsor of today's video, Dev Mountain. Dev Mountain is a 13-week class for all of you aspiring iOS and web developers out there. Their 13-week class focuses on providing you only the skills that you actually need to go out there and start your new career in coding. They don't waste time with a filler curriculum like at a traditional college. They also feature student housing at no extra cost, a variety of different classes including UX design and QA testing, and most importantly, all of this is available at an affordable price. Head on down to that first link in the description to learn more if you're interested in getting that quick boost you need to start your new career in coding and design. Alright, so like I said in the intro, I'm pretty sure you've all watched other GTX 1660 videos before this one because I had to buy this thing on my own and wait for shipping, so I'm not going to dive incredibly deep onto the intro of this specific card. As always, if you don't care about my opinion on the specs of this card, my testing rig, or anything like that, and you just want to see the benchmarks, then feel free to skip to the benchmarking timestamp for this video. If not, then the specific card that we're looking at today is the EVGA GTX 1660 XC edition, which is actually EVGA's mid-tier 1660 and not the cheapest. If you look here on Newegg, EVGA is selling 3 different versions of the 1660, one for $250, $230, and $220, but this middle tier one actually costs $220 after a $10 rebate card, so you might as well buy that one like I did. This version is slightly overclocked more than the cheapest one at 1830 MHz. It's rocking 1408 CUDA cores and 6GB of unfortunately the slower GDDR5 memory and not GDDR6 like the 1660 Ti that I reviewed earlier. Just like the EVGA 2.75 slot GTX 1660 Ti, I am very unhappy with the ports of these GPUs. It's only rocking one DisplayPort 1.4, one HDMI 2.0B, and one dual-link DVI-D, and I just don't understand why they don't have at least 2 display ports on here. If you're looking to add this GPU to a triple monitor setup, then this is definitely something to be aware of because most people aren't using DVI-D cables anymore, and I just don't understand why they did this. One other thing to note is that I'm not necessarily saying that these 2.75 slot EVGA models are the best. These are just what I picked up because I can get a little more creative in my budget builds with a one-fan GPU, kind of like how I did with the 1660 Ti in a Dell Optiplex video. If you're thinking about picking this model up, then just make sure that you have enough expansion slots in your case, or just get a standard 2-slot 2-fan version if you need to. Alright, so moving on to the actual performance of the 1660, we've already seen from some other YouTubers that paired it with like an i9-9900K that it's indeed rocking some serious value for $220, but how well is it performing with a CPU that's actually a realistic option? In my opinion, the 1660 is one of the first brand new GPUs that is a perfect buy for you Ryzen APU owners out there, as I personally think it'll pair perfectly with either a Ryzen 3 2200G or even the Ryzen 5 2400G. I've been recommending for over a year now that it's such a good idea for you new budget builders to build a new PC with a 2200G and then save your money until you can afford a better GPU, and that time has finally come with a worthy graphics card. Since that's the case, today we'll be benchmarking the 1660 with my brand new testing rig, which is indeed rocking a 2200G, so we'll be able to see how it performs in an actual realistic environment. This rig is also rocking 16GB of DDR4 memory clocked at 3000 MHz, and the games are installed on a 500GB Samsung 840 EVO SSD. As always, the settings that you're about to see for each game are the settings that I personally recommend, so just know that you can always tweak those to your liking. The first game up was Apex Legends, and for this game I jacked the settings up to 1080p and max settings with TSAA, and I got an average frame rate of 70 FPS. As you can see in the top left hand corner, this was a perfect balance between CPU and GPU usage, and we're off to a great start for this combination. Next up was Fortnite, and in 1080p and Epic settings I got an impressive 92 average, however the 1% and 0.1% lows were a little low in my opinion. This was most likely due to the Ryzen 3 processor, but keep in mind that if you cap the frame rate at 60, which I definitely recommend you do if you have a 60Hz monitor, those lows would be much higher and it'd be more consistent. Counter-Strike Global Offensive was up next, and in 1080p and high settings with FXAA, I got an average of 168, but once again that 0.1% low was pretty low, probably because this is a CPU demanding game and the Ryzen 3 is good, but not great. Following that, I tested PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and in 1080p and Ultra settings, I got a solid FPS average of 93. And for our last easier to run online shooter game, Rainbow Six Siege was up next, and with the built-in benchmarking tool, I got a very impressive 149 FPS average using 1080p in ultra settings. Getting into our tougher to run games, Far Cry New Dawn was up next, and in 1080p in ultra settings, I got just above our target 60 FPS mark. As you can see with this one, the 2200G in 1660 matches up pretty well, as they were always about the same at 80 to 95% utilization. Next up was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and in 1080p in high settings, couldn't get to the highest settings with this one. Here I averaged 48, and this one is definitely screaming CPU bottleneck. As we all already know, Odyssey is one of the most CPU demanding games that I benchmark on the channel, not to mention it's terribly unoptimized, so the 1660 is certainly capable of getting better graphics and performance, but the Ryzen 3 definitely held it back a bit on this one. After that, I fired up Battlefield 5, and during a multiplayer match in 1080p in ultra settings, I got a very respectable 75 FPS average, and the game stayed pretty consistent and smooth. After that, I used the Shadow of the Tomb Raider built-in benchmarking tool, and in 1080p in the highest settings, no RTX obviously though, here I still got an FPS average of 52. And finally, the last game I ran was the brand new Division 2. Make sure you check out my dedicated benchmarking video that I just uploaded, and in 1080p in ultra settings, I got an average FPS of 66. This one also showed slight signs of a CPU bottleneck. The GPU utilization was usually around 85 while the CPU was at 100, but certainly not a bad bottleneck. So those are the results for the 1660. As you can easily see, the Ryzen 3 2200G and 1660 are a great combination for some 1080p and max settings gaming action at 60 FPS, but just be aware that the Ryzen 3 could indeed cause a bottleneck for those insanely CPU dependent games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In my opinion, a better option for the Ryzen 5 2400G would be the 1660 Ti, which I also made a dedicated video on, but you really can't go wrong with any of these combinations. Well, there you have it. That wraps up my 1660 review and benchmarking video. Make sure you guys drop a comment down below if you're thinking about picking this card up, or what CPU you already paired with the 1660. After that, feel free to head on over to one of these two videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit that subscribe button, because coming up next, we're celebrating a pretty interesting holiday. You don't want to miss that video.